Blood was still drying on Vincent D'Agostino's knuckles when he heard the voice. It wasn't the plea of a dying man or the wail of approaching police sirens. It was a tiny, trembling whisper cutting through the pouring midnight rain of a Chicago alleyway. He turned, expecting a desperate beggar, but instead saw a little girl no older than 6, clutching a soaked, mangled teddy bear. She didn't flinch at the sight of his armed guards or the violence in his eyes. She just looked straight at the city's most ruthless syndicate boss and asked, "Mister, do you know anyone who wants a child?" The rain in Chicago had a way of washing the blood from the streets, but leaving the stench of sin behind. Vincent D'Agostino, the undisputed head of the D'Agostino crime syndicate, stood under the meager shelter of a rusted fire escape. At 34, he had a reputation that made grown men cross the street and seasoned detectives look the other way. He was a man carved from marble and cruelty, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that somehow remained immaculate despite the gruesome execution he had just overseen in the adjacent warehouse. "Car's ready, boss," Theo Gallagher, his right-hand man, muttered, adjusting the collar of his trench coat against the biting wind. Theo was a hulking brute of an Irishman, fiercely loyal and entirely devoid of empathy for anyone outside their immediate circle. Vincent gave a curt nod, lifting his hand to wipe a rogue drop of water, or perhaps something darker, from his jawline. He took one step toward the idling, bulletproof Maybach, waiting at the curb, when the soft, jarring voice stopped him in his tracks. "Mister, do you know anyone who wants a child?" Vincent froze. The alley was dark, illuminated only by the flickering neon sign of a pawn shop across the street. He slowly turned his head. Standing just a few feet away, half hidden by a stack of wooden pallets, was a child. She was wearing an oversized, faded yellow raincoat that swallowed her small frame. Rain plastered her dark hair to her pale cheeks. Theo instantly reached inside his coat, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol. It was an involuntary reaction. In their world, assassins came in all shapes and sizes. But Vincent raised 2 fingers, silently commanding Theo to stand down. "What did you say?" Vincent's voice was a low, gravelly baritone. It usually made people tremble. The girl didn't tremble, though her lips were blue with cold. "I asked if you know anyone who wants a child," she repeated, her voice remarkably steady for someone so small. She stepped entirely out of the shadows. She was clutching a dirty teddy bear missing one button eye. "I'm a very good worker. I can sweep floors and I don't eat very much. I only cost $50,000. Theo let out a harsh, incredulous breath. "Kid, you better run along before—" "Quiet, Tommy," Vincent snapped, never taking his dark, piercing eyes off the girl. He crouched down, the damp asphalt ruining the knees of his $3,000 trousers. He didn't care. There was something profoundly unsettling about the absolute dead-end desperation in this child's eyes. It was a look he was intimately familiar with, a look he had seen in the mirror 2 decades ago. $50,000, Vincent repeated slowly, testing the weight of the number. That's a very specific price for a little girl. "What's your name?" "Mia," she said. She didn't offer a last name. "Well, Mia, why do you need $50,000? You looking to buy a very fancy bicycle?" Mia shook her head solemnly. "No, it's to pay the bad men. If I don't pay them, they're going to hurt Sapphira. I figured if a rich man bought me, I could leave the money on the kitchen table for her, and then she would be safe." Vincent felt a strange, cold tightening in his chest. He was a monster. He had ordered hits, shattered kneecaps, and extorted millions. But the syndicate had rules, and children were strictly out of bounds. The idea that someone was squeezing a family so hard that a 6-year-old felt the need to auction herself off in a dark alley stirred a dormant, dangerous rage within him. "Who is Sapphira?" Vincent asked, his voice softening just a fraction. "My big sister. She's my mum now, too, since our real mum died." Mia looked down at her rain-soaked boots. "Please, you look very rich, and you have scary friends. Do you want to buy me?" Vincent stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The rain pounded relentlessly against the pavement. He looked at Theo, who looked utterly bewildered by the fact that the devil of the East Coast was having a heart-to-heart with a street urchin. Vincent stood up to his full, towering height of 6'3". He didn't smile, he rarely did, but he held out his large, scarred hand. "I don't buy children, Mia," Vincent said softly. "But I think I know how to handle bad men. Come with me." Mia hesitated, looking from his hand to his eyes. Whatever she saw there, it was enough. She slipped her tiny, freezing hand into his. The interior of the Maybach was a sanctuary of warm, ambient lighting and the smell of expensive leather. Maya sat rigidly in the back seat, her feet dangling inches above the floor mats. Vincent had draped his own heavy wool overcoat over her small shoulders, wrapping her up like a fragile package. Theo sat in the front passenger seat, shooting confused glances through the rearview mirror. "Where to, boss?" the driver asked, hesitant to interrupt the bizarre silence. "The estate," Vincent replied. The estate, sir?" Theo echoed, turning around. "We have a sit-down with the Calabrese family at 2 a.m. You can't be serious about taking a stray kid back to the fortress." "Did I stutter, Tommy?" Vincent's voice dropped an octave, a lethal warning hidden beneath the quiet tone. Theo immediately turned back around, swallowing hard. When the heavy iron gates of the D'Agostino compound swung open, Maya finally pressed her face against the tinted glass. The sprawling, fortress-like mansion in the wealthy suburbs of Illinois was surrounded by high walls and armed guards patrolling the grounds with Dobermans. It was a place where nightmares were orchestrated, yet tonight it was serving as an orphanage. Once inside, Vincent handed the child over to Rosa, his fiercely loyal and deeply maternal housekeeper. Rosa didn't ask questions. The sight of the shivering, soaked girl was enough to spring her into a flurry of warm towels, hot cocoa, and maternal scolding directed at the men for keeping her out in the rain. Vincent retreated to his study, a massive room lined with dark mahogany and smelling of expensive scotch and cigars. He poured himself a drink, staring at the amber liquid as it swirled over the ice. He was losing his mind. He had a multi-million-dollar empire to run, a mole to find within his ranks, and the FBI breathing down his neck. Yet all he could think about was a missing button eye on a teddy bear. 10 minutes later, Theo entered the study, holding a tablet. He looked serious. "I ran the name through our street contacts," Theo said, setting the tablet on Vincent's desk. "It didn't take long to piece it together. The girl's full name is Mia Laurent. Her older sister is Sapphira Laurent." "And who is Sapphira Laurent?" Vincent asked, taking a slow sip of his scotch. "She's a 24-year-old civilian, works 3 jobs, barely sleeps from the looks of it. But here is the kicker, boss. Their father was Paul Laurent." Vincent's eyes narrowed. The name was familiar. Paul Laurent, the bookkeeper. "Exactly," Theo nodded, leaning over the desk. "He was a mid-level accountant for Lorenzo Rossi. 5 months ago, Paul was caught skimming off the top of Rossi's underground casinos. Rossi didn't just fire him, he had him strung up under the South Street Bridge. But Rossi is a greedy bastard. He claimed Paul still owed him 50 grand with interest. Since the parents are dead, the debt transferred to the next of kin. Sapphira. Vincent's grip on his crystal glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. Lorenzo Rossi. The man was a parasite, the head of a rival faction that operated with no code, no honor, and no limits. The blood feud between the D'Agostinos and the Rossis went back 2 generations. Rossi's men have been terrorizing the sister, Theo continued, his voice grim, threatening to take the little girl and put her into, well, the kind of trafficking rings Rossi runs to pay off the debt. The kid wasn't lying. She was trying to sell herself to save her sister. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the study. Vincent D'Agostino was a man who trafficked in violence, but he targeted other predators. What Rossi was doing to a defenseless woman and a child was a violation of the old codes. "Where is Safira Laurent right now?" Vincent asked quietly. "She works the graveyard shift at the Starlight Diner on 4th Avenue. Rossi's enforcers usually pay her a visit on Tuesday nights to collect whatever scraps she managed to save. Tonight is Tuesday." Vincent set his glass down. It made a sharp clack against the mahogany. He adjusted his cuffs, his face an unreadable mask of cold, calculated fury. "Get the cars ready, Tommy," Vincent commanded, stepping toward the door. "We're going to get some coffee." The Starlight Diner was a relic of the 1970s, a greasy spoon with flickering fluorescent lights, peeling vinyl booths, and the perpetual smell of stale coffee and fried onions. At 1:30 a.m. it was mostly empty, save for a drunk sleeping in a corner booth and a tired truck driver at the counter. Behind the counter stood Safira Laurent. She was beautiful, though exhaustion had painted deep, dark circles under her striking hazel eyes. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her pale blue uniform was stained with grease. But right now, she wasn't focused on the coffee she was brewing. She was having a full-blown panic attack. Her hands shook violently as she dialed her neighbor's number on the diner's landline for the 10th time. "Pick up, Mrs. Higgins. Please pick up. Where is Mia?" Safira had called home on her break 30 minutes ago, only to find out Mia wasn't in the apartment. The terror consuming her was absolute. She knew Lorenzo Rossi's men were due tonight. Had they taken her? Had they bypassed the warnings and just snatched a 6-year-old girl? The chime above the diner door violently jingled, ripping Safira from her spiraling thoughts. Her blood ran cold. Stepping through the door were 3 men wearing cheap leather jackets. At the center was Jimmy the Rat O'Neill, one of Rossi's lowest, most vicious debt collectors. He had a sleazy grin that showed a chipped front tooth, and his eyes roamed over Safira with sickening familiarity. "Evening, sweetheart," Jimmy purred, sliding into a stool at the counter. His 2 goons flanked him, cracking their knuckles. "You look stressed. Forget to brew the decaf?" "Where is she?" Safira demanded, her voice cracking as she abandoned the coffee pot and slammed her hands on the counter. "If you touched her, Jimmy, I swear to God—" "Whoa, relax," Jimmy laughed, holding his hands up in mock surrender. "We ain't touched the brat. Yet. But that depends entirely on whether you got the 5,000 you owe us for this month's interest." Safira's breath hitched. She pulled a thin white envelope from her apron pocket and threw it on the counter. "There's 1,200. That's all I have. I sold my mother's wedding ring. Just give me another week for the rest." Jimmy picked up the envelope, opened it, and sneered. He let the bills flutter onto the sticky counter. 1,200? What do you think this is, Charity? Rossi's patience is gone, Safira. You're coming with us. We know a club downtown where you can make up the rest of this debt on your back. And as for the kid, we'll find a nice, profitable home for her. Jimmy reached across the counter, his filthy hand grabbing Safira's wrist with a bruising grip. Sapphira screamed, thrashing wildly, grabbing a scalding pot of coffee with her free hand to hurl at him. Before she could lift it, the chime above the door rang again. The atmosphere in the diner instantly plummeted by 10 degrees. It wasn't just a drop in temperature. It was the sudden, oppressive weight of pure dominance entering the room. Jimmy froze, irritated by the interruption. He turned his head, ready to bark a threat at whoever walked in. The words died in his throat. Vincent D'Agostino stood in the doorway, framed by the stormy night. Behind him, Theo and 4 other heavily armed men blocked the exit. Vincent's eyes were locked onto Jimmy's hand, which was still gripping Sapphira's wrist. Jimmy let go, as if her skin had suddenly caught fire. He stumbled back off his stool, knocking it over. "D'Agostino," he stammered, his face draining of all color. The 2 goons beside him instinctively raised their hands, terrified. Sapphira backed up against the pie display case, clutching her bruised wrist, her chest heaving. She didn't know the man in the bespoke suit, but she recognized the aura of a kingpin. He was terrifying, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes as dark and unforgiving as a starless night. Vincent walked slowly toward the counter. His polished Italian leather shoes made soft, deliberate sounds against the checkered linoleum. He didn't look at Sapphira. He kept his eyes pinned on Jimmy. "Jimmy O'Neill," Vincent said, his voice smooth and deadly quiet. "You're a long way from Rossi's territory. Just collecting a debt, Mr. D'Agostino," Jimmy squeaked, backing up until he hit a booth. "No disrespect intended. We're just doing business." "Business?" Vincent repeated. He glanced at the meager pile of crumpled bills on the counter. "Extorting women and threatening children is Rossi's business. In my city, we call that a nuisance." Before Jimmy could blink, Vincent's arm shot out. He grabbed Jimmy by the throat, lifting the man to his toes, and slammed him back onto the diner counter with bone-shattering force. The sugar shakers and napkin holders went flying. Vincent didn't raise his voice, nor did he break a sweat. He leaned in close to Jimmy's terrified, gasping face. "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic piece of trash," Vincent whispered. "The Laurent debt belongs to me now. If you or Rossi, or any of your mangy dogs, ever come within a 10-mile radius of this woman or her sister again, I will personally peel the skin from your bones and mail it to your boss. Do we have an understanding?" Jimmy nodded frantically, gasping for air. Vincent dropped him in disgust. "Run!" Jimmy and his goons scrambled over each other, bursting out the back exit of the diner into the alley, too terrified to even look back. Silence reclaimed the diner. Sapphira stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched as this dangerous, beautiful monster pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his hands, and finally turned his gaze to her. "Sapphira Laurent," Vincent said, his tone softening dramatically, though the danger still radiated from him. "Who are you?" she stammered, grabbing a steak knife from under the counter, holding it in front of her. "What do you want? What did you mean the debt is yours?" Vincent looked at the shaking knife, mildly amused. "Put the knife down, Miss Laurent. I am not here to hurt you. My name is Vincent D'Agostino, and I believe I have someone at my home who belongs to you. A little girl with a very strong business sense and a one-eyed teddy bear." Sapphira's knees buckled. She dropped the knife, letting out a sob of pure relief. "Mia. You have Mia. Is she okay? Is she hurt?" "She is perfectly safe, eating her weight in chocolate chip cookies in my kitchen," Vincent said, stepping closer. "But we cannot stay here. Rossi will send more men when he hears about this. You are coming with me." Sapphira stiffened, her street smarts kicking back in. "I don't go anywhere with Mafia bosses. You just bought my debt. Why? What do you want from me? I don't have $50,000. Vincent stopped. He studied her defiant, fierce, hazel eyes. She was terrified, yet she was standing her ground against a man who could end her life with a snap of his fingers. He felt a completely foreign spark of admiration ignite in his chest. I don't care about the $50,000, Sapphira, Vincent said truthfully. I care about the fact that your sister wandered into my territory looking to sell her life for yours. Sapphira swallowed hard. Then why buy the debt? Men like you don't do favors. You're right. We don't, Vincent replied. But Tommy here did some digging while we were driving over. Your father wasn't killed just for skimming off the top, was he? Sapphira's face went completely pale. The defiance melted into sheer, unadulterated dread. She looked away, her silence screaming the truth. He stole something, Vincent guessed, stepping right up to the counter, invading her space, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Something much more valuable than 50 grand. That's why Rossi is pressing you so hard. He's using the money as an excuse. What did your father take, Sapphira? Sapphira looked up into Vincent's dark eyes. She had no choice. She was backed into a corner, and this man was her only way out. A ledger, she whispered, her voice trembling. My father took Rossi's black book. It has every judge, every dirty cop, and every politician on Rossi's payroll. My father hid it before they killed him, and he mailed the key to me. Rossi doesn't want money, Mr. D'Agostino. He wants his empire back, and I'm the only one who knows where it is. Vincent stared at her, a slow, predatory smirk spreading across his handsome face. The universe had not just handed him a stray child, it had handed him the ultimate weapon to destroy his greatest enemy, wrapped in the form of a beautiful, desperate woman. Well, Sapphira, Vincent murmured, offering his hand to her. It looks like we have a lot to discuss. Let's go home. Sapphira Laurent woke with a sharp garhob, her hands instinctively clutching the sheets as her heart hammered against her ribs. For a terrifying second, she thought she was back in the cramped, freezing bedroom of her Chicago walk-up, waiting for the heavy footsteps of Lorenzo Rossi's enforcers. But the air here didn't smell like damp drywall and cheap bleach. It smelled of lavender and lemon polish. She blinked against the bright morning light pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. The bed she was lying in was massive, draped in crisp white fret linens that felt softer than anything she had ever touched. Above her hung a modern glass chandelier, and across the room sat an antique vanity lined with unopened jars of La Mer skincare. It was a room designed for a queen, not a terrified, indebted waitress. Then, the memories of the previous night crashed over her like a tidal wave. The diner, Jimmy O'Neill, the towering, terrifying presence of Vincent D'Agostino, the ledger, Mia. Sapphira threw off the silk comforter and sprinted out of the bedroom. She raced down a sprawling, marble-floored hallway, lined with Renaissance-style oil paintings and heavy mahogany doors. The D'Agostino estate in Lake Forest was a labyrinth of wealth and power, but she just followed the sound of a child's laughter. She burst through a set of double-swinging doors and stumbled into a kitchen the size of a restaurant. "Look, Sophie, Rosa made pancakes with chocolate faces." Mia was sitting at a massive granite island, swinging her legs enthusiastically. Her dark hair was neatly braided, and she was wearing a brand-new, expensive-looking pink cashmere sweater. Standing next to her was Rosa, a plump, warm-eyed woman who was expertly flipping bacon on a 6-burner wolf range. Sapphira's knees went weak with relief. She rushed forward, pulling her little sister into a desperate, crushing hug. She buried her face in Mia's hair, breathing in the scent of expensive vanilla shampoo. "You're squishing me," Mia giggled, though she hugged her sister back tightly. "I'm sorry, Monkey. I'm just so glad you're okay," Saphira whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Sit, sit." "You are too thin, Kara," Rosa commanded gently, pushing a plate of bacon and eggs toward an empty stool. "The boss said you were to eat as soon as you woke up. He is waiting for you in his study." The mention of the boss instantly vaporized the warmth in the room for Saphira. Vincent D'Agostino wasn't a savior. He was a predator who happened to share her enemy. She smoothed down her clothes. She had slept in an oversized t-shirt someone had left on the bed and realized she needed to face the devil. "Watch her, please," Saphira said to Rosa, who gave a solemn, understanding nod. Theo Gallagher was waiting for her outside the kitchen. In the daylight, the burly Irishman looked slightly less menacing, though the bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his tailored navy jacket ruined the illusion. He led her in silence to the west wing of the estate, stopping in front of heavy oak double doors. He knocked twice and pushed them open. Vincent D'Agostino was standing by the window, staring out at the manicured lawns rolling down toward Lake Michigan. In the unforgiving light of day, he was shockingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features and dark hair styled with effortless precision. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing a heavy Patek Philippe Nautilus watch on his left wrist and a lattice of faded, violent scars on his right forearm. He didn't turn around immediately. He simply took a drag from a cigar, the smoke curling around him like a halo of shadows. "Did you sleep well, Saphira?" Vincent asked, his deep voice vibrating through the quiet room. "I didn't come here to discuss my sleep, Mr. D'Agostino," Saphira said, crossing her arms to hide the slight tremor in her hands. Vincent finally turned, a slow, dangerous smirk playing on his lips. He walked over to his massive desk and extinguished the cigar in a heavy baccarat crystal ashtray. "No, I suppose you didn't. You came here because you are a smart woman who realizes she is out of options." Vincent leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his ankles. "Rossi's men are turning the city upside down looking for you. They hit 2 of my low-level collection fronts this morning, just to send a message. You are a very wanted woman." Saphira swallowed hard. "I told you last night. I have the key to my father's safety deposit box. It contains the ledger. Everything you need to dismantle Rossi's network from the inside out." "And where is this key?" Vincent asked, his dark eyes locking onto hers, stripping away her defenses. "Safe," Saphira lied smoothly. "I hid it. And I'm not giving it to you. Not yet." The atmosphere in the room plummeted. Theo, standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably. Vincent pushed himself off the desk, stalking toward her with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator. He stopped mere inches from her, forcing Saphira to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. She refused to step away, though her heart was frantically beating against her ribs. "Do not play games with me, Saphira," Vincent murmured, his voice a silken threat. "I am not a patient man, and I do not negotiate with guests in my own home. You will tell me where the key is, and I will retrieve it." "No." Saphira stood her ground, her hazel eyes flashing with defiance. "You get that book, and I have no leverage. What's stopping you from handing me and Mia over to Rossi the second you have what you want? Or just tossing us back onto the street?" Vincent stared down at her, genuinely taken aback. In his world, people begged, they cowered, they surrendered. They did not stand chest to chest with him and make demands. She smelled like the lavender soap from his guest bathroom, and beneath her fear, he sensed a fierce, unyielding fire. He found himself inexplicably captivated by her absolute refusal to break. "If I wanted you dead, You would be dead, Sapphira, Vincent said softly, lifting a hand. For a breathless second, Sapphira thought he was going to strike her. Instead, his knuckles grazed her jawline, calloused and warm. The touch sent a violent, confusing shiver down her spine. I don't break my word. You are under my protection. I need a guarantee, she whispered, hating how her voice betrayed her. You want the ledger? You get it after Lorenzo Rossi is dead and buried. Until then, you protect my sister. You provide for her. And you let us walk away when it's over. Vincent studied her face, the desperation and the terrifying bravery etched into her features. He dropped his hand, stepping back, instantly replacing the strange, charged intimacy with a mask of cold calculation. You have a deal, Miss Laurent, Vincent said, turning back to his desk. But make no mistake. From this moment forward, you belong to the D'Agostino family until this debt is settled in blood. You do not leave this estate without my permission. You do not make phone calls. You are a ghost. Sapphira nodded once. Fine. Good, Vincent replied, picking up a file folder. Now go back to your sister. We have a war to prepare for. 3 days later, the war arrived. Sapphira had spent the time confined to the estate, pacing the lavish gardens and watching Mir play with the guard dogs, who surprisingly turned into gentle puppies around the little girl. It was a bizarre existence, a golden cage wrapped in barbed wire. She barely saw Vincent. He left early in bulletproof Mercedes-Benz G-wagons and returned late, smelling of smoke and violence. It happened on a Friday evening. Sapphira was in the library, trying to focus on a book, when the heavy oak doors banged open. Vincent strode in, his face an immaculate mask of fury. His suit jacket was gone, his tie loosened, and there was a smear of soot on his white collar. Theo was hot on his heels, looking pale. Pack a bag for the kid. Rosa is taking her to the safe house in Aspen, Vincent barked, pouring himself 3 fingers of scotch and downing it in one swallow. Sapphira shot out of her leather chair, the book tumbling to the floor. What? No! You promised me she stays with me. What happened? Vincent slammed the glass down on the trolley. He turned to her, his eyes blazing with a terrifying intensity. What happened, Sapphira, is that Lorenzo Rossi just firebombed the Starlight Diner and your apartment building. He left 3 of my soldiers bleeding out on the pavement outside a Chase Bank downtown. He knows I have you. Sapphira gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. The diner, her tiny, shabby apartment, all of it, gone in an instant. The reality of the monster she had unleashed crashed down on her. The commission has called an emergency sit-down tomorrow night at the Palmer House Hilton, Vincent continued, pacing the length of the library like a caged panther. The 5 families are demanding answers. They don't want a bloodbath in the streets of Chicago over a waitress and a missing ledger. Rossi has petitioned the commission to force me to hand you over, claiming you are civilian collateral and not under syndicate protection. Can they do that? Sapphira whispered, panic rising in her throat like bile. Can they force you to give us to him? Under the old laws of Omerta? Yes, Theo interjected, his voice grim. If a civilian possesses stolen syndicate property, the ledger, and isn't blood-tied to a family, the commission can order a neutral handover to prevent a turf war. If the boss refuses, all 5 families turn on us. We're strong, but we can't fight the entire Midwest underground. Sapphira felt the room spinning. She grabbed the edge of a mahogany bookshelf to steady herself. So that's it? You're giving me up? Vincent stopped pacing. He stared at her, his jaw clenching so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbing her by the shoulders. His grip was entirely firm but lacked any intent to hurt. "I don't give up what is mine," Vincent growled, his face inches from hers. The sheer force of his presence was intoxicating, a chaotic mix of danger and absolute security. "But we have a problem. The only way the Commission's laws protect you unconditionally is if you are family. Blood or bound." Sapphira blinked, her brain struggling to process his words over the deafening roar of her own heartbeat. "Bound? What do you mean?" Vincent released her shoulders, stepping back to button his waistcoat, restoring his armor of cold detachment. "Rossi wants to use the rules against me? Fine. I will rewrite them. You are no longer a civilian holding a stolen ledger, Sapphira. As of an hour ago, my lawyers filed the preliminary paperwork." "Paperwork for what?" Sapphira demanded, a deep sense of dread pooling in her stomach. Vincent looked at her, his dark eyes entirely devoid of humor. "A marriage license." Silence descended on the library, so heavy and absolute it felt suffocating. "Excuse me?" Sapphira choked out, staring at him as if he had just sprouted a second head. You want to marry me?" "I don't want to marry anyone," Vincent corrected coldly. "But I will be damned if Lorenzo Rossi dictates terms in my city. If you are my wife, you are untouchable. By Rossi, by the Commission, by anyone. Any move against you becomes an act of war against the D'Agostino family directly, which the Commission will not allow Rossi to instigate." "You're insane," Sapphira shook her head, backing away from him. "You can't just force me to marry a Mafia boss. This is madness. There has to be another way." "There isn't," Vincent snapped, his patience fraying. "You want to protect your sister. You want Rossi in the ground. This is the price. Tomorrow night at the Palmer house, you will walk in on my arm wearing a ring that costs more than your life. You will smile. You will look devoted. And you will confirm to the most dangerous men in this country that you are my fiancé." Sapphira stared at him, tears of frustration and terror burning her eyes. She hated him in that moment. She hated his power, his arrogance, and the absolute certainty in his voice. But beneath the hatred, a terrifying realization bloomed. He was risking a massive underworld war, alienating his allies, and tying his own life to a waitress, all to keep a promise he made to a 6-year-old girl in an alley. "And if I refuse?" she challenged softly, her voice trembling. Vincent walked slowly toward her again. He didn't stop until she was backed flat against the heavy bookshelves. He raised his hand, his thumb gently swiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The contrast between his violent world and the incredible gentleness of his touch made her breath hitch. "Then I pack you and Mia in a car, hand you a briefcase of cash, and send you running for the rest of your lives," Vincent whispered, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. "But we both know you're tired of running, Sapphira. Stay. Fight him with me." Sapphira looked up into the eyes of the devil of Chicago. She saw no warmth, no romance, only a brutal, unyielding determination. Yet her heart betrayed her, skipping a beat under his intense scrutiny. "Okay," Sapphira breathed, the single word sealing her fate. "I'll do it." Vincent's eyes darkened, a flash of something possessive and predatory flickering in their depths. "Good. Then you belong to me now. Tell Rosa to find you a dress for tomorrow. We have an engagement to announce." The Empire Room at the Palmer House Hilton was a masterpiece of French Empire design, boasting 24-carat gold-dipped chandeliers and sweeping frescoes. Tonight, however, the opulent ballroom felt more like a beautifully decorated slaughterhouse. The doors were locked, the staff had been dismissed with heavy envelopes of cash, and the perimeter was secured by 50 of the most heavily armed enforcers in the Midwest. Sapphira stepped out of the bulletproof Maybach, her hand gripped firmly in Vincent D'Agostino's. She felt like an imposter stepping up to the guillotine. Rosa had dressed her in a breathtaking, floor-length crimson Versace gown that clung to her curves and made her pale skin glow. Around her neck rested a string of flawless diamonds, but it was the blinding 6-carat Cartier emerald-cut ring on her left hand that felt like an anchor dragging her into the abyss. "Breathe, Sapphira," Vincent murmured, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. To any onlooker, it was a gesture of profound affection. To Sapphira, it was a lifeline. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo that tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders, radiating a lethal elegance that made the men around them instinctively step back. "Keep your eyes on me. Let me do the talking. If Rossi speaks to you, do not engage." "I'm terrified," she whispered back, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "I know," Vincent replied, his grip on her hand tightening reassuringly. But they don't. They passed through the heavy gilded doors and into the lion's den. At the center of the vast room sat a long mahogany table. 5 men occupied the seats, the heads of the Chicago Commission. At the head of the table was Don Salvatore, an elderly, wheezing man who ruled the old-school factions with an iron fist, and standing at the far end of the room, flanked by 6 bruisers, was Lorenzo Rossi. Rossi was a bloated, red-faced man in his late 50s, wearing a flashy, ill-fitting silver suit. The moment his beady eyes locked onto Sapphira, a vile, triumphant smile stretched across his face. "Well, well," Rossi sneered, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "D'Agostino actually brought the stray. I'm surprised, Vincent. I figured you'd make me burn down another diner to get your attention." Vincent did not stop walking until he reached the table. He pulled out a chair for Sapphira, waiting until she was seated before taking the spot beside her. He didn't look at Rossi. He addressed Don Salvatore. "I am here out of respect for the commission, Don Salvatore," Vincent said, his voice a smooth, icy baritone that commanded absolute silence in the room. "Not because this parasitic street thief summoned me." Rossi slammed his hands on the table. "Watch your mouth, D'Agostino. That woman is holding stolen property belonging to my family. Her father was a thief, and she inherits his debt. By the laws of Omerta, she is a civilian who has involved herself in syndicate business. She belongs to me." Don Salvatore raised a frail, liver-spotted hand. The room fell dead silent. He turned his heavy hooded eyes toward Vincent. "Lorenzo speaks the law, Vincent. If the girl has the ledger, she is a liability to us all. You cannot harbor her. Hand her over, and the commission will consider this matter closed. Refuse, and you stand against all 5 families." Sapphira felt her heart stop. The entire underworld was poised to crush her. She looked at Vincent, expecting to see hesitation. Instead, Vincent leaned back in his chair, a dark, mocking smile playing on his lips. He slowly reached out and took Sapphira's left hand, lifting it so the blinding light of the chandeliers caught the massive Cartier diamond. "Lorenzo Rossi seems to be misinformed about the law," Vincent stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Sapphira Laurent is not a civilian, and she certainly does not belong to him. She is my fiancée. We are to be married at the end of the month." A collective gasp rippled through the enforcers lining the walls. Rossi's face turned an ugly, mottled purple. Don Salvatore's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Liar!" Rossi roared, pointing a trembling finger at Vincent. "This is a sham, a pathetic trick to bypass the rules. You expect us to believe the devil of Chicago fell in love with a greasy diner waitress in 3 days? I demand you hand her over." "Demand?" Vincent stood up, the chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. The sudden, explosive violence in his posture made 3 of Rossi's men reach for their holstered weapons. Theo Gallagher, standing behind Vincent, unbuttoned his jacket in a silent, deadly promise. "You do not demand anything from me, Rossi," Vincent growled, his voice dropping to a terrifying register. "She wears my ring. She is under the absolute, irrevocable protection of the D'Agostino family. If you so much as breathe in her direction, if you even look at her sister again, I will not wait for the Commission's blessing. I will slaughter you and every man who takes your coin." The tension in the room was of physical weight, thick and suffocating. Don Salvatore stared at Vincent, recognizing the unbreakable resolve in the younger Don's eyes. A blood war with the D'Agostinos would cost them all millions. "A betrothal binds her to your house," Don Salvatore wheezed slowly, tapping his cane against the floor. "The law is the law. Lorenzo, you cannot touch the girl. She is D'Agostino's now." "What about my ledger?" Rossi screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "That book has my entire operation in it. I won't let this arrogant bastard hold it over my head." Sapphira, whose heart was hammering against her ribs, suddenly realized the game Vincent was playing. He had shielded her, but Rossi would never stop hunting them as long as the ledger existed. She needed to end this. She reached into the bodice of her Versace gown, her fingers closing around cold metal. "Mr. Rossi," Sapphira said. Her voice wavered for a second before hardening into steel. Every eye in the room snapped to her. She pulled her hand free and slammed a small, brass safety deposit key onto the mahogany table. "My father died because of your greed," Sapphira said, staring directly into the eyes of her tormentor. "The ledger is in a private vault at the Chase Bank on Monroe Street. Box 814. Here is the key." Vincent looked at her, his eyes flashing with a mixture of shock and profound respect. She was giving up her only leverage, but in doing so, she was stripping Rossi of his excuse to wage war. Rossi stared at the key like a starving dog. He lunged forward and snatched it off the table. "You stupid bitch," he hissed, backing away toward his men. "You just signed your own death warrant. The Commission's ruling only protects you as long as you're breathing." "Meeting adjourned," Vincent snapped, stepping in front of Sapphira, blocking Rossi's view. "Get out of my sight, Lorenzo, before I change my mind about letting you walk out of here." The storm broke exactly 1 hour later. Vincent had known Rossi wouldn't simply walk away. A man like Lorenzo Rossi, humiliated in front of the Commission, would rather burn the city down than accept defeat. As the bulletproof Maybach pulled up to the heavily fortified gates of the D'Agostino estate in Lake Forest, the night erupted in fire. 2 black SUVs rammed through the wrought-iron barricades, automatic weapons blazing. Rossi had decided to strike before Vincent could consolidate his power. "Get down!" Vincent roared, throwing his massive frame over Sapphira as a hail of bullets shattered the reinforced glass of their car. The deafening roar of gunfire echoed through the manicured gardens. "Boss, we're boxed in!" Theo yelled from the front seat, kicking his door open and returning fire with a suppressed submachine gun. "Stay in the car, Sapphira. Do not move," Vincent commanded, his eyes burning with a terrifying cold focus. He drew a heavy Glock 19 from his shoulder holster. "Vincent, no!" Sapphira screamed, grabbing his sleeve, terrified of losing the monster who had just become her savior. "I promise to protect you," Vincent said, his voice startlingly gentle amidst the chaos. He pressed a brief, hard kiss to her forehead. "I intend to keep it." Vincent kicked his door open and stepped into the crossfire. The ensuing battle was short, brutal, and definitive. Vincent D'Agostino was a tactician of violence. His men, trained like paramilitary operatives, quickly flanked Rossi's crude street thugs. Sapphira, huddled on the floorboards of the Maybach, covered her ears as the deafening cracks of gunfire slowly dwindled to agonizing groans. Then, silence. "Clear!" Theo's voice rang out through the smoke-filled air. Sapphira cautiously lifted her head, peering over the shattered window ledge. The driveway was a war zone of bullet-riddled vehicles and groaning men. Standing in the center of the carnage, untouched and entirely lethal, was Vincent. At his feet lay Lorenzo Rossi, clutching a shattered knee, his silver suit stained crimson. Vincent looked down at the man who had terrorized Sapphira, a man who would have sold little Mia to the highest bidder. Vincent didn't gloat. He didn't monologue. He simply raised his weapon. "This is for Paul Laurent," Vincent stated coldly. 2 hollow, definitive shots rang out. Lorenzo Rossi fell perfectly still. The nightmare was over. Vincent lowered his gun, his chest heaving slightly. He turned slowly, his dark eyes searching the wreckage until they locked onto Sapphira. She was climbing out of the ruined car, the hem of her expensive crimson dress soaked in muddy rainwater and shattered glass. She didn't run away from the blood or the violence. She ran straight to him. Vincent dropped his weapon and caught her as she crashed into his chest. He wrapped his arms around her tightly, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her against the sharp, metallic tang of gunpowder. For the first time in his brutal, calculated life, the devil of Chicago felt his heart beat for something other than power. "It's over," Vincent murmured against her ear, his voice uncharacteristically ragged. "He's gone. You're safe. Mia is safe." Sapphira pulled back slightly, looking up into his dark, searching eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, terrifying vulnerability. The commission ruling, the engagement, it was just to protect me. "What happens now, Vincent? Rossi is dead. My debt is paid. You have your city." Vincent reached up, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw, his touch a stark contrast to the violence he had just unleashed. He looked at the massive diamond glittering on her finger. "I told you in my study, Sapphira," Vincent said quietly, the mask of the syndicate boss slipping away to reveal the man beneath. "I don't give up what is mine. You asked for a guarantee that I wouldn't throw you back onto the street. I am giving it to you." Sapphira's breath hitched. You want the marriage to be real?" "I want you to stay," Vincent corrected, leaning down until their lips were a breath apart. "I want the girl who stood up to me in a diner. I want the woman who outsmarted the commission. And I want the little girl who sold herself to a monster just to keep you safe to grow up in a home where no one will ever hurt her again. Stay with me, Sapphira." Sapphira looked at the blood on the driveway, the shattered glass, and then at the man holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He was a monster to the rest of the world, but to her, he was the only sanctuary she had ever known. "Okay," Sapphira whispered, tears of relief finally falling freely. "I'll stay." Vincent closed the distance, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of rain, adrenaline, and a fierce, undeniable promise. 6 months later, the Chicago rain washed the streets clean, just as it always did. But the shadows of the underworld had shifted. The D'Agostino syndicate ruled with an unquestioned, ironclad peace. Inside the fortified estate in Lake Forest, a different kind of peace reigned. Sapphira stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite, watching the golden hour light bathe the manicured lawns. Down below, Vincent D'Agostino, the most feared man in the Midwest, was sitting on the grass in a bespoke suit, having a highly serious tea party. Across from him sat Mia, giggling as she poured imaginary tea into a tiny plastic cup for him. Sitting in the place of honor between them was a worn, mangled teddy bear with only one button eye. Sapphira smiled, resting a hand over her newly rounded stomach. The nightmare that had begun in a dark alleyway had ended in an empire of unexpected love. Mia had asked a monster if he wanted to buy a child, not knowing she was giving a devil the one thing he didn't know he needed: a family.